Thanks so much, everyone who's joining us here in Cambridge and who's watching this keynote lecture online. For those of you who are just joining us now, I'm Emily Channel-Justice. I am the director of the Temerty Contemporary Ukraine program here at the Ukrainian Research Institute, and I'm the organizer of this conference on decolonizing Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you. As we have talked through what it means to decolonize today, and as I have been thinking about this concept of the conference, one of the key parts of decolonizing is action. Decolonizing doesn't just happen, it's demanded, it's fought for, and it's contested. 10 years ago, Ukrainians across the country gathered in their city's main squares to fight for Ukraine's future. They were fighting not just for Europe, but for a government that represented them and that respected their dignity. And at the same time, on the other side of the world, Ukrainians in New York City were finding new ways to fight for Ukraine and for Ukrainians who were mobilizing for a better future. Founded in 2014, Razom for Ukraine has been supporting the Ukrainian community in the US, as well as contributing to volunteer efforts in Ukraine since the first Russian invasion just a few months after the organization's establishment in January 2014. Razom, meaning together, was a term that meant a lot to a lot of people who stood together on Kyiv's Independence Square in the cold winter of 2014. You didn't have to physically be there to be standing with protesters and supporting their fight. The Razom organization has showed us how to stand together in solidarity with Ukraine in 2014, and again when Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022. They already had strong ties with groups across Ukraine that could deliver aid and other kinds of support across the country. Together, Razom has raised over $100 million for Ukraine since 2022. In addition, they've expanded their advocacy program to make sure that our elected leaders in the US know how important Ukraine is to American voters. This advocacy is why Dora Khomyak is this year's keynote lecturer. Dora is the CEO of Razom, but she has been an advocate for Ukraine since before its independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. She received her AB from Princeton and her MBA from Columbia, and she has worked with international organizations such as USAID and Internews, and she's supported the development of independent journalism in Ukraine since the 1990s. With these ties, she has helped guide Razom's work to be about building a stronger Ukraine from within, identifying people's interests and strengths, and helping them put these to work for Ukraine. So please join me now in welcoming Dora Khomyak.
Thank you. Emily, thank you for that introduction. Thank you for inviting me to be an active participant in the Harvard Ukrainian community. While many of us blend active and theoretical support for Ukraine, the two spheres rarely have a chance to interact directly. And I know that we're not going to let this particular opportunity slip us by to make the most of it. So, Emily, thank you for putting together, curating really a terrific set of conversations here in this room and online. Those are the cameras, right? Hello, everybody online. Thank you for joining. Thank you also to the Temerty Foundation for making this conversation possible. So I was asked to speak for about 30 minutes or so, which is frankly a bit terrifying because I don't think I've ever done that without a Q&A. So, but what I want to do is share a bit how my early work in Ukraine conditioned me to pay really close attention to the people who live in Ukraine, rather than rely on the analyses and the theories. No offense to the grad students in the house. Then I'll talk about how Razom decolonizes in practice. And my hope is that through this journey we'll take together today, we'll keep working together, we'll keep working Razom towards the shared goal of Peremoha. So I look forward to your questions in the second half of our time together. So be thinking of them, online too. So Emily shared a bit of my formal biography. But what doesn't make it into the public resume are a few details that I want to share with you today, because they really inform how I approach decolonization in practice and why I feel so fortunate to be able to work with my colleagues at Erasmus throughout a few continents. These points I want to share with you also illustrate where Ukraine has been over the past few decades, so that we can pause for a minute and recognize how much has changed. So I was born on this side of the Iron Curtain, yet both of my parents, in very different fields, functioned in a way that always let me see Ukraine as being connected to the broader world. Even if I wasn't able to travel there, or even communicate with my cousins who lived on the other side of the Iron Curtain, it was a real place. So we lived outside of Washington, D.C. when I was growing up with my grandparents who had survived both world wars. And I grew up very American, with a very American spirit of understanding this idea of sort of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Even though if you sit down and think about it literally, it's completely impossible. But it's work with me. So I also came to realize kind of early that a lot of people could have boots, but they might not have the bootstraps. It doesn't help much. Like if you don't have the tools, what are you going to do? So at an early age, I came to HURI. That's my mom, Professor Martha Buczewski-Komiak, shout out. My older sister, and me on the steps of, I guess, the old HURI building, right? This was actually around the time that I was denied a visa the first time. How can you deny a visa to that kid to be like a flower child? Like empires, not good. Let's not do that. So I finally did get a visa to go to the USSR right in its waning years on an academic exchange when I was at Princeton. It was 1989. Actually, this is the first time I went was in 1989. The second time was 1990. This is in Zaporizhia. But right around that time was just as people were talking about sovereignty, independence, holding rallies, reciting poetry, and drafting various demands. So I heard, I was there. I got to listen as former political prisoners debated Communist Party bosses about independence versus sovereignty. And I noticed something else too when I went to visit my family in Lviv and went to these rallies and listened to these poems and listened to these debates. In Lviv, in 1989 and 90, people did not have running water 24/7. So, a city of 700,000 people without running water, and as part of a superpower. My aunt's apartment where I stayed was in one of the more convenient neighborhoods, not necessarily because of its location, but the location was awesome too. But it was convenient because she knew there would be water from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Anyone in Lviv at that time? Was anyone else in Lviv? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Gotcha. So this basic need wasn't being filled by this rock star superpower. So this made me curious, and I decided to write my senior thesis in Princeton about local government and what are they doing to get people like you and me water throughout the day. So I interviewed a bunch of various officials, and I came to realize at the city level, the oblast level, all different kinds. This was 1990, 91. I realized that the people who are in charge of making sure there's water in view don't actually know each other. And they're not able to solve the problems. And as you looked at it more and more, in fact, I actually did reread my thesis a couple years ago, and I was like, relevant. But the system of management wasn't centered in Lviv. It was run in faraway Moscow. And it wasn't optimized. It was rational in that it was optimized to make sure the military factories in Lviv had whatever water they needed. So the colonizer set the rules, And the colony didn't have the water. 6 to 9 and 6 to 9. So think about that. Here we are in 2024. This is 1991. So noticing the actual needs of people in Ukraine really focused my attention. And instead of getting my thesis published, I took a job at the Soros Foundation in Kyiv in Soviet Ukraine. And that was the view from my temporary hotel room around that time. And so I was there just to it's easy to forget when we talk about the collapse of the Soviet Union we looked at everything from Moscow and it's, Gorby and all that. But on December 1st, 1991, people in Ukraine voted for independence. And every single oblast, including the one that is not landlocked, voted overwhelmingly in favor of supporting the Declaration of Independence that the parliament had declared back in August. So Ukrainians as a democracy, even kind of coming out of the Soviet Union, over 90% of the people in Ukraine, like the vote was 90% for independence. And that was way back then. That was, looks different now. But I did have the honor of visiting several polling stations in Kyiv then. It was cold, but people were there voting. And it was a sort of weird hybrid of like Communist Party voting. Was anyone else there December 1st? Anyone? December 1st in Ukraine? December 1st, 1991. Did you vote? Yes. Bravo. See? Ukrainians vote. Way to go. So I took my first job there at the Soros Foundations. I took it in the Soviet Ukraine, and by the time I landed, it was independent Ukraine. That was a good move. And I started working with journalists in Ukraine. And I quickly came to realize that journalists in Ukraine had the skills and the expertise, but they lacked access to the tools to make the TV shows that they wanted. It was only state-run TV at the time. So they didn't have the editing suites, the cameras, the airwaves. Plus, it's early 90s, so the supply lines were cut and all messed up. So what does that mean? That meant that I would regularly stuff reams of Post-it notes into my suitcases from New York to Kyiv. That meant that people would get on overnight trains and go from Kyiv to Moscow to buy copy paper. We at the Renaissance Foundation, the Soros Foundation, would buy computers and fax machines and printers in the States and ship them over. So I say this to remind us that Ukraine had a long way to go on this decolonizing path. So journalists there had the expertise, they had the drive, but they needed the hardware or the tools and some connections. So by 1993, we assembled a group of journalists together with a US-based nonprofit that was based in Northern California called Internews Network. And we applied for a $7 million grant from USAID. We won it, and we used it to create an independent media incubator. We didn't call it that then, but now we'd call it an incubator at Hristiatic 4. And that armed aspiring independent journalists with cameras and editing facilities. You could think of those as like the bootstraps. So eventually that project resulted in a lot of different organizations. Some of them are still around. You might know the news agency Union. Anyone follow Union? Yes. Okay. Internews Ukraine and several other things. The tools gave journalists the sovereignty to act independently from centralized structures. But in the process of taking action and connecting the tools with the people, we learned a few things. One is we got access to a facility in the center of Kyiv. This is a picture of it, not from that time because I wasn't carrying a camera with me every day and I couldn't find a picture. So this is a later picture, but it's the same building. It's at Hristiatic 4, right in the center of Kyiv. And we got access to it because it had been closed. It was built as the news agency that produced all the news that Moscow thought appropriate for Ukrainians to know. So it was the Kremlin-run APN, now known as RIA Novosti. So when I remember walking into that place for the first time with the guy, like the guy who had the key. All the calendars on the desks were set to August 1991, the day of the putsch. The rooms, though, were in great shape. In terms of finishes, I've done a couple renovations, so like I have an appreciation. Finishes, nicer than your run-of-the-mill, even Communist Party office. Like these are nice offices. But the layout of the rooms was really weird. So it was these 2 floors. Dare I use the pointer? 2 floors. L-shaped, 2 floors. And I was told that the director of the news agency was housed in one office that was huge over here, and the vice director was housed in another one that was also huge over there. But they were on opposite ends of a long hallway on different floors. This was before I got an MBA, but I was like, now you can look at this as another example of just glaring colonialism in practice. You could say that the layout of the office space was designed intentionally to prevent independent action, but provide a veneer of sovereignty while just creating inefficient management sort of in its wake. So I point this out because the physical space we find ourselves in really kind of determines how we operate and what we do. And this was 1990, and by now it was like 1993 when we moved into this. So a bunch of Ukrainian journalists, mostly male, all smokers, and I, neither of those things, worked around the clock once we got access to the space and we got some seed funding. So we coaxed journalists and producers and camera operators to leave the security of state TV news with its Trudova Knishka, with like actual a pension plan, like an employment, and walk down the street to this startup. We didn't know if it would stick. I was usually the only American in the building. Everybody else had a Soviet education. Most of my colleagues had served in the Soviet army. Nobody spoke English. Several of my closest colleagues were born in the North. And the Gulag cast a shadow. I remember my colleague Volodya telling me how he was reprimanded for going on live TV wearing a yellow t-shirt and blue jeans. And I was like, is that too casual? Are the jeans too much? And he looked at me like, no, Darga, it's the colors. Yellow t-shirt and blue jeans. I was like, so although Ukraine had reaffirmed its sovereignty legally in 1990, the reality was much different. So we moved fast. So we moved fast because we didn't know, is the window going to shut? How much, is it going to slam shut? How much can we get done? So we took this showy, crazy layout of colonizer office space. And we took one office and turned it into the headquarters of a national network of TV stations. And by national network of TV stations, I mean, we would record a show on a video cassette and put it on a train, and it would go by train to one city, and they would air it and then put on another train and air that show in the next city. So it worked. The other office was we turned into the accounting office. And everything in between, we filled up with journalists of the news agency, Unyan. Unyan reported nationwide and was used by all sorts of media outlets. What we did not do was build an economic revenue model for all those media entities to continue to survive. But that's a topic for another talk. So this is at Hristiatic 4. Ukraine was in the throes of dramatic and economic changes, but they were always, regardless of the amount of outside support, up to the Ukrainians to make it stick. And their durability was always dependent on the Ukrainians themselves. And with this picture, I really want to give a sort of gratitude and shout out to some of the people who were there regularly coming in. On the far side there is the late Bohdan Havrilishin, who helped found the Renaissance Foundation. George Soros in the next to him, Bohdan Kravchenko. And then there's a 1994 version of me making some point that we need to move faster. But whatever we did, it was up to the Ukrainians whether it was really going to stick. So I didn't write articles or books, and I didn't come up with some big theory of modernization or decolonization. But I did learn that if I could do whatever I could to provide tools to people and work alongside them, we could make a big impact. So when I moved back to New York City in 1994, Ukraine had a stronger free press, a stronger civil society, and a more secure sense of independence. And from afar, I watched how Ukraine changed dramatically but authentically. Citizens modernized and adapted to the systems they inherited. Kind of to put it into those housing construction terms, it was a renovation rather than a tear down. The country had a functioning government infrastructure, a functioning private sector, a vibrant volunteer community, a free and expansive media, room for improvement on all of those things, for sure. But overall, a citizenry experienced in political organization on a mass scale, with an understanding that the actions of a citizen really did influence larger institutions. Ukrainian citizens had agency then as they do now. Studying at Princeton, I didn't necessarily see that because I couldn't find a single book about Ukraine in Firestone Library. So I also got a certificate in Russian studies for all of my independent work in Ukraine. But I did come back to the States. There was a real difference. Much greater awareness of Ukraine. I no longer had to explain where I had my first job out of college. I didn't have to explain where my parents were born. Ukrainian American diaspora organizations, whose events I grew up attending, graduated Ukrainian school in Washington, D.C. Matura, any Matura graduates? Yes. Okay, nice. It's the comprehensive exams after 11 years of Saturday school. But the diaspora organizations were well-meaning, but they weren't very efficient in supplying Ukrainians with what they needed to grow the economy. The established diaspora organizations, which had really strengthened after World War II, continued to be focused on preserving, very insular, preserving and protecting. And Ukrainians in Ukraine moved beyond them. So new tools were needed. And new relationships were possible. You could go there. The window didn't shut. But the most urgently needed and the most valuable tools became skills and relationships, not just the physical stuff that I hauled across the Boryspil airport. The new tools were externally focused, connected to the world, sovereign, and confident in existing. So in the fall of 2013, I let myself get a little hopeful about the students who had gathered on Maidan in central Kyiv. And I started listening even more closely to family and friends in Ukraine. When the Revolution of Dignity emerged, I saw a new generation of Ukrainians who had grown up speaking English, as well as Ukrainian and other languages. A generation that was reading things on the internet, not on fax machines that were hard to get. A generation having a sense of individual responsibility and being aware of their ability to make change outside of themselves. So I started asking myself, what tools did they have? What tools did they need to do more? So as the weeks went on, and as I watched the video streams from Kyiv, and as I observed as the founders of Razom emerged from solidarity rallies in New York City and start the organization, I recognized that spark, the resilience, and the tenacity of Ukrainians that first grabbed me in 1989. But this time, people behave differently. It was clearly rooted in Ukraine, and it was clearly connected with the world. And it's with those fundamentals in that environment that Razom grew from a handful of millennial Ukraine-born founders to an organization that's delivered, not just raised, delivered $110 million of aid since the full-scale invasion in February 2022. And that really is everyone in this room and everyone on the Zoom. In less than 2 years, we've grown from an all-volunteer community of just under 4,000 donors. And each year of Razom, from 2014 to 2022, the organization spent no more than $200,000 each year. And I know that because if you get more in New York City, you have to fill out a longer tax form. Always a short form. So today, it's over 220,000 of us, everyone in this room, who's contributing time and money and smarts. And our donors and supporters are from all 50 states, several countries around the world. We take this very seriously, and we've done a lot of work, which I'd be happy to talk about in the Q&A. We've done a lot of work to build a professional staff that works with volunteers across continents, still working side by side, people in Ukraine, people outside of Ukraine, still sharing the tools, the expertise, and the community with each other to be effective in building Ukrainian sovereignty. So I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you about Razom right now in hopes that you'll have some amazing questions later. So today, Razom is an aid and advocacy organization. We're unique in that we do both. Each day, our teams work to save lives, to create a brighter future, and to promote Ukrainian voices through all our different programs. We work on the military front. We work in hospitals, we work in village communities, on Capitol Hill, and in cultural spaces everywhere. And our mission hasn't changed since 2014, but our activities have. We know this work goes beyond the battlefield, so we're building an institution for the long haul. We work with over 400 hospitals and with over 150 Ukrainian NGOs to respond to the needs today while building structures for tomorrow that embody the sovereignty and the power of Ukraine. So at our first annual meeting, someone printed up tote bags with our tagline, which is something I want to keep in mind. The founders of Razom when they created the Razom, it was Razom, together we are Ukraine. Keep that in mind as I walk through how just a few examples of how we do our work today, and how I suggest that if you think of like together we're Ukraine, then that's an approach to decolonization in practice. So across our 5 programs, we have certain characteristics. I've recently started thinking about it as a formula of brains, bricks, and community. We bet on Ukrainians. We don't send aid in one direction. Instead, we work side by side with people in Ukraine to identify what the gaps are and to start doing something that meets that immediate need. The people closest to the problem have awesome ideas on how to fix it, especially if they're Ukrainians. So we provide the supplies or the bricks when needed. We collaborate to build community. We bring in the expertise, the brains, or we connect the brains as needed. So we're able to deliver physical goods straight into the hands of the end users. So for example, as part of our program in health, we purchase portable ultrasounds, kind of handheld things that let you see what's happening under the skin. But we don't just buy them and ship them and call it a day. Before a medical professional receives them, they attend a training program with a colleague. And at that training program, they learn how to use the thing, but they're also collaborating with their colleague and they're meeting colleagues from other hospitals. So in the course of learning how to use the bricks, how to use the hardware, they're making connections in community and exchanging expertise in the brains. So we've already distributed over 200 of these portable ultrasounds. And it's Ukrainians doing it in Ukraine. Another example is, here's, you see some surgeons, a mix of, US surgeons want to come to Ukraine and help. Now, they could just swoop in, do some surgeries and leave, and that would be great for the patients, but we try and go beyond that. So we pair up surgeons in Ukraine with surgeons in the United States, and they collaborate for weeks by video beforehand, and then they come and they work together, and then when they're working together and seeing patients, they're doing some teaching, and they walk away with a bunch of students knowing more and a bunch of professionals already practicing knowing more, and a bunch of Americans who have just discovered Ukraine, part of a community of fellow doctors, all fired up about continuing to engage with Ukraine and get better themselves. Another example in our relief program is this project, Korisni Lude in Avdiivka. There are people who needed power banks, and a small group of people in Avdiivka figured out how to take car batteries. Don't get me on OSHA for this. How to get car batteries and rejigger them to be power banks. You can charge your phones. So we have hundreds of stories like this because we've worked with so many different NGOs, and our NGOs are really our partners. And I'm hoping the crew from Rescue Now, amazing group of people. Find those guys, find out what they're doing. Ask them about the Seeds Project, because literally planting seeds. I'll leave it there. But among these small and large NGOs in Ukraine, one of the things we did was take the app Signal and create a joint chat for all the NGOs where they could communicate with each other. And they're swapping information and they're helping each other out. And then when the Kakhovka Dam was bombed, within hours, there were people on the ground because they were talking with each other, who has a car, who has a boat, who has this, who has that, what's in what warehouse, and could collaborate and do that. So we don't take a cookie cutter approach, but we really look to empower people to solve the problems on the ground. Who's seen 20 Days in Mariupol? Oscar nominee? Yes. Tell all your friends. So we have been working with producers, PBS Frontline, for several months now to promote this film, to put it in front of audiences. This is a film about 20 Days in Mariupol, made by Ukrainians. It's, if anyone's, I was personally worried about seeing it the first time. But for an American audience, it's a highly recommend. I'm really, really glad I saw it and would encourage everyone to see it. Through our Connect program, we try and put things made by Ukrainians in front of audiences, whether it's a movie like 20 Days in Mariupol, whether it's book translations we're doing together with Huri. Thank you. There's music, there's visual arts. I mean, there's just so much amazing creativity coming out of Ukraine. So moment to take out your cell phone and scan this QR code if you would like to get a copy of 20 Days in Mariupol for your school library. Alexa runs our Ukraine on Campus program. Hello. Yes, and all the stipendees. We have started with Alexa's leadership, reaching out to campuses across the United States that have Ukraine groups, and a few people are attending here on a stipend. So hands up, stipendee, yes. Meet these people. They're doing cool stuff at universities, decolonizing from the ground up. So scan this code, see the movie, get it in your libraries. So right now, people in Ukraine are stopping a major military, poorly organized, but brutal force. We at Razom are focused on making sure the combat medics have what they need to reduce the casualty rate. So first aid kits, not just started with first aid kits, tourniquets, all that stuff, moved on to tactical medical backpacks, cars, evacuation vehicles, more things. What I want to share with you today is that we changed how we do things we're always changing how we do things. We changed how we do things in 2023 in that we shifted where we buy the stuff for the combat medics to provide aid to Ukraine. Instead of just going out anywhere in the global market, we're now procuring as much as we can from manufacturers in Ukraine because we can't wait for the missiles to stop to start building the economy. So in 2023, preliminary unaudited numbers suggest that we spent 35% of our procurement was from manufacturers in Ukraine. So back in April, here's an example of a factory that makes medical backpacks. So this is something, not an individual, but this is like within each group, there's a sort of a bigger thing. I got to visit this factory. It's called Acropolis. Is the Acropolis person here? Online, shout out. Okay. So this is a factory that started off making sandals and then made gear for mushrooming and hunting. So anyone who's been to Ukraine, mushrooming, they have a really cool mushrooming backpack. But they've pivoted, they've adapted to the market, and they now make these tactical medical backpacks, and we work with them, and they're one of a few suppliers. But we've adjusted how the thing is shaped and what it's made of and what it looks like based on the feedback that we've gotten from the people who use it in the front. And we're able to get that feedback. So this is a nice, not sweatshop looking thing. So cool stuff is made in Ukraine. I'm wearing some of it today. Highly recommend go on Instagram, buy Ukraine. We're able to get all this feedback because we have a dedicated team of drivers who've been with us for 2 years, we have a small fleet of vans, and they, here they are, the guys. They hand the goods to the end user and get the akty priyoma передачи with all the pechatki and all the documentation back and forth. We got it in paper, we scan it, we built our own database to manage it. But these guys see the end users face to face, get feedback, take it back to the factory adjusts it, constantly moving like that. So these guys have traveled over 1 million kilometers in the past 2 years, which by my calculation is 25 trips around the world. And the roads they're on, not so great. These guys, yeah. But everything we do is iterative. We try and say, how can we do this better? How can we do this differently? What are the needs? And so in April 2022, we stood up a dedicated team of people to work on Capitol Hill and the White House. And through our earlier work with surgeons back in 2017, when we were doing these sort of joint surgical trips, we had met with some doctors who worked in Syria. And these doctor activists had been coping with a brutal Russian-led war longer than we had. And in March of 2022, they got on a video call with us and mapped out what was coming. So March 2022, put yourself there. A bunch of us huddled around a laptop with a video call. And I remember the lead doctor describing the types of injuries that are happening in Ukraine, what's going to happen in a couple weeks, next injury, here it goes. The rate of casualties, all of these things. And then he got to something that really made me literally lean into the laptop even closer. He talked about his experience dealing with the assault on Syria. He talked about how organizations in the United States responded and what happened with policymakers in DC and kind of what worked and what didn't, and watch out for this, and this is going to come around the bend. And so we listened and we took action. And Razom helped to create the American Coalition for Ukraine, which is a platform now that includes more than 100 organizations that engage in advocacy in the United States to help support Ukrainian victory. We've hosted 3 action summits that brought hundreds of constituents to meet with members of Congress, to educate them, and to urge them to do more to aid Ukraine. So as a politics grad that got all fired up by all the changes and of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, I love seeing my Native American citizens, my fellow American citizens, get engaged with our representatives and to hold them accountable. This week is particularly critical because $60 billion, that's with a B, $60 billion in aid hangs in the balance for Ukraine. Ukrainian soldiers are already reporting that there's not enough ammunition, so they're rationing what they can do. So like they're getting hit and they're not necessarily pushing back. So our full-time team in Washington, D.C. is working around the clock and collaborating with organizations, looking at you, around the country to make sure that the legislators do the right thing. America is the largest donor of military assistance to Ukraine. And without Washington's leadership, it would be difficult to maintain Ukraine's ability to defend its territory. The good news is there's a path to pass this crucial legislation that's coming up. Like it's literally like it's working its way through the corridors of the Hill right now. So as I'm sure all of you know, Ukraine aid got caught up in our messy domestic politics about the southern border. So when the Senate releases the actual border deal text, I fully expect to see Americans who see Ukraine and who know Ukraine to come out in full force. I'm going to be calling everyone in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I already have my 2 members of the House of Representatives' phone numbers in my phone book, as well as my 2 senators, my representative. So I've got 3 phone numbers on speed dial. Call them every day. Tell them, hey, it's Dora Komiak. I'm in the zip code. Ukraine matters. Do the right thing. So I highly recommend figuring out just this QR code will take you to a spot where you can easily find who represents you and make sure that they understand what's important to you. So the US delay does have a silver lining. Europe woke up and is taking leadership for European security. The European Union authorized $54 billion in assistance, and the EU is pledging to increase its output. Not surprising, because people in Europe know what's coming. But we need to do our part to make sure that they have the support they need to do what needs to be done. And I'm confident that we got this because this poster was made by Ukrainians, and I bought it in a bookstore in 1989. It says, "The truth will arise." Sounds better in Ukrainian. Stane pravda, right? Tishevi, Taras Shevchenko. You're in the know. So he wrote some good stuff. Highly recommend finding out more about it. But what I want to acknowledge is that thousands of incredibly dedicated people in Ukraine and in the United States have worked consistently over the course of the decade to build Razom, to build other organizations, and to really make a big difference. And we are standing on the shoulders of giants in the room who've done tremendous work. And at Razom, we strive to live up to the ideals of the revolution of dignity. So as I was thinking about sort of how do you decolonize in practice, three themes really come to mind. First, whatever you do, ask yourself, can I do it working side by side with someone? People in the United States, people in Ukraine. They're two big countries. There's lots of different kinds of people. Make sure there's lots of different kinds of people at your table or on your video call. Get a good mix. The second thing is be comprehensive. Don't do one and done. Approach a problem or an opportunity from as many angles as you can. And finally, if you've talked with me at any point in the past 5 years, you've heard me say that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So stay for the long haul. There are no quick fixes. Build institutions, build sovereignty, pace yourself. There is change. There is water in Lviv. It just takes a while. So Ukraine's been colonized, and the study of Ukraine has also been colonized. And all of us here who deal with and study things Ukraine, we have to act, not just write, with the knowledge that Ukraine continues to face an imperial threat. But now things are different from 1991. People leading Ukraine now were born in revolution and know from their own experience that their actions can make a difference. Olia Onuch calls them the independence generation. I'm proud to call them my colleagues at Razum. So as I close, let me encourage you to decolonize in practice through action, wherever you are. Bet on Ukrainians in Ukraine. Provide tools and access. This next one's kind of hard, so get ready. Learn from people in Ukraine. Open your mind. Get a mic, get an audience, hand the mic to a Ukrainian. Step aside. Build something together. We have a lot to learn. But if you work side by side with people in Ukraine, we can see that we have different but complementary roles to play. So use them, listen to each other, and we can do it right now and stay for the long haul. So as I hope you can see, our single-minded focus on Ukraine in the Razum allows us not only to help Ukraine, but to be an integral part of the community. So before I open the floor to questions, I have an audience, have a mic. I would like to ask Valentina Sotnikova to come to the stage. She is a PhD in comparative literature. She's based in Ukraine, where she teaches and hosts a popular YouTube channel and podcast where she explores Ukrainian literature, Tishevy and others, as a tool to help people decolonize themselves. I'm not going to say any more for now. I'll let her explain, and then we'll do questions. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Well, I'll start with my background. So I actually worked as a school teacher. I taught Ukrainian language and literature, and it was hard. I don't work as a teacher now, but I actually take part in some educational projects in Ukraine. I work with NGOs that are trying to make our education better. But I can talk about literature and I can communicate about it, even to those who don't want to read it. Yeah, that's true. That's what teachers do. Yeah, and that was the reason my friend, Mariam Nayem, asked me to help her to understand Ukrainian literature. She studied it at school, but she wasn't impressed. And now she wanted just to decolonize herself by studying all school program of Ukrainian literature. So I told her that I will make a program for her, individual program, and we'll do it. And I told her, well, we can do it in half a year. We're still there. So it didn't work so well. But then my husband told us, like, hey, you should put those lessons on YouTube for people to watch it and maybe to encourage other people to reread those texts they have read 20, 10 years, even 5 years ago at school. And we did it. And it worked well. People really watching our videos and they are writing comments like, thanks a lot for bringing this text, because I don't remember reading it at school and it impressed me now. And thanks for just talking about those authors who were killed during Soviet Union times and in Russia Empire. And so actually, our statistics says that people from Russia are also watching our videos. Yeah, it was a surprise for me and Mariam too. But after we started this channel, we were talking a lot on decolonization, and then we decided to start a podcast. Well, all people are listening to podcasts now. And it was an easy way to have an audience who is ready to listen to some series, but in a simple language. Like we are talking about series on decolonization, and then we are talking about TV shows. And we have examples from TV shows to show what decolonization is and what colony is and what imperialism is. But first of all, our idea was for make people do not feel guilty that they have read Russian literature or that they have studied Russian culture at school, at the university, and how to do it. It's hard, but we started from ourselves. So I was born in a Russian-speaking family. I was raised in a Russian-speaking family, and then I started to learn Ukrainian philology at the university. And I dedicated my academic career to Ukrainian literature. So it was important for me to tell that it's okay that you were raised in a Russian-speaking family, but you can change it. It's your decision. So just please learn your culture in easy way. Or maybe you want to be maybe you want to read academic papers. It's fine. Find your way to your culture. So our podcast is really popular among Ukrainians. We even get an award as the best cultural podcast in last year. So now we're working on the second season because people are waiting and asking. And and we know that we should talk more about what people can do in their life day by day just to decolonize. So our main idea is for people just to do it every day for a little bit. And then in future, we all will learn our culture. We will know it. And we can spread a word about it among the world. But we are already decolonizing, but you can help us by learning our culture too. Please do it with us. Talk with us about it. We are ready to do it. And it's important for us to talk about our culture, not about Russia culture, but about Ukrainian culture, about Ukrainian authors who are still alive. And they are writing now, not when they're dead at the war, but now when they're alive. So please talk to us. We are ready.
Thank you so much, Valentina, for that really impassioned conclusion. And thank you, Dora, for the whole lecture and giving Valentina this moment. I think that it was a very nice counterbalance to the previous couple of panels, which had a little bit more of a challenge and maybe not so much positive energy. Yeah, so I'm going to just exercise my power as moderator to ask the first question, and then I'll open it to the floor. We still have about half an hour. And I'm thinking about people, because that's what's at the center of how you're talking about how Razom does what it does, how advocacy works, everything in your talk. And I'm thinking a little bit about Maria Stanovitsky talking earlier about presenting Ukrainians as superheroes and, doing these superhuman things, which actually kind of dehumanizes. And then I'm also thinking about somebody I interacted with at a talk who wanted to help Ukrainians and had been supporting Ukrainians in some ways, mostly by collecting secondhand goods and shipping them to Ukraine. And this woman was not familiar with the context of Ukraine at all, but she portrayed the people that were being helped as destitute and with no agency and with no willingness to help themselves. And that has never been my experience working in Ukraine. And for those of you who have experienced Ukraine, it's probably not yours either. So I guess the question is, what's the middle ground, right? Between recognizing people's humanity, recognizing the need for help, and creating a new way to interact with people that respects both of those things, right? The fact that they are regular people, but they're also suffering from something that is in fact inhumane.
That's a great question. And over the past, particularly 2 years, I've had some pretty weird experiences with kind of along the lines of what you described. I think what Valentina said is really it. Like, learn, be curious. So the middle ground is find out where you are, whether you're someone in need of assistance or someone who's able to provide assistance or someone who's able to do a little bit of one or a little bit of the other. I was shocked because I've never worked I've worked in nonprofit, I've worked in for-profit, startups, large companies, but the whole kind of international aid, like humanitarian aid business was new to me. I got a crash course in it over the past 2 years. And I found myself in 2022 on panels with representatives of these establishment international aid organizations that like travel work all around the world. And I'd be like the Ukraine I'm like, well, we do Ukraine. I don't know about anything else, but like this is what we're doing. And I had several of these people who worked for large international NGOs tell me how shocked they were when they arrived in Ukraine wanting to help. And then they were confronted with Ukraine, like they were ready to do everything soup to nuts. And then they arrive and the Ukrainians are already organized, whether it's Rescue Now or, understand the needs, have some kind of structure. It looks like Maidan. So you're like, where's the org chart? What's the PowerPoint pitch deck? Like it looks like an anthill, but it's working. So they were shocked at like how much initiative Ukrainians had. And then my favorite was like, yeah, I came in like the Ukrainian NGO was like, how come you don't have an app for that yet? Because like we already built an app, like, yeah, we're getting bombed at, but at least like our users can interact with us and they know what they need. So there was a bit of a, as someone who used to do digital transformation strategy, that was like, oh yeah. So but if you listen, like the smart ones were like, oh, this is Ukraine 2022. It's the same, like in business, this is my customer. What are their needs? How can I, where's the opportunity here? So I think the middle ground is finding what do each of us have and stopping and hearing each other every once in a while and going like, well, what do you really have to offer? I mean, you've got this amazing venue to offer and you're offering it and you're bringing together people who wouldn't necessarily meet otherwise. That's incredible. But you've listened to people and you've adapted and adjusted. So it's that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I'd love to open the floor for questions. I'm sure there's very, very many. So Vlad, we'll go ahead and start. One second. So please do wait for the microphone so that our Zoom audience can hear. And do please tell us your name.
My name is Vlad Shapiro. I'm also one of the having an organization to help Ukraine for sure. We're from Ukraine, originally from Kyiv. Two things. First, who created this great rating, which came up all over the internet, put you number 4 on the list of the most influential Ukrainian. Have you seen it?
Melinda?
Number 1, United 24. Number 2, Pritula. Number 3, Nova Ukraine. Ukraine, you number 4. I don't know who created it. You have to find out.
I know who created it.
Yes, well, it's all over the place.
I can tell you why I think we deserve it, because we spent 10 years doing all sorts of stuff like accounting, budgeting.
The serious question is this, and I don't know, I mean, that's the thing. Serious question is the following. I think one of the things we need to help, and I know if you're doing it or not, is to not only start educating adults here in this country, but also children. A lot of books on Eastern Europe history was written you know where. And our son went to school here, and a lot of probably people here, children are going to school, not in Newton. I'm sorry if you're in Newton right now. Yeah.
Schooling.
Yeah, no, but have you created any kind of a program or ideas about how to change that, how to bring the knowledge about Ukraine to that level? Thank you very much. And parents definitely for them. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, our approach has been to make content made by Ukrainians available as broadly as possible. So we've done a lot with cinema, with music. We had a culture festival last year. My 2 daughters are sophomores in college, and it terrifies me how much their experience is different from mine, but in some ways in terms of like what books they have access to and stuff. I would have thought that by now, like it would be much more advanced, but there's so much great content made by Ukrainians, but the ecosystem to get it translated, to get it published, to get it into the books, it takes a while. Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute is doing a lot to make this stuff available, but it all needs to be on like SuperDrive. I know in schools, we're not doing anything specifically in schools. And also our focus really is on Ukraine specifically. We are working with we have been for years through the Olympiad program, working with kids in Ukraine, helping them get trained for various Olympiads and to compete internationally, which has been really cool. And that's kind of gone on overdrive too. But that's been our approach. So it's the content and then through the Olympiads.
In the red sweater.
So thank you for your work and your comments. That ratio of 35% procurement locally is extraordinary.
Preliminary, unaudited numbers.
Well, maybe
listening to my CFO.
So what do you advise, or what do you think are the major impediments to business formation in Ukraine as you see it at the grassroots level? And is there something that can be done here to help?
Call your members of Congress. I say that jokingly. So my understanding of the major impediment is security. So the big problem is the missiles and the drones, but kind of put that aside. Then there are some kind of infrastructure business constraints, but which is why I like the way that we're working. So we're not starting businesses, but we're being a customer. And by being a customer and sort of being an actor in the economy, then we're not just sort of creating demand and creating jobs, but now you've got factories that are paying taxes and scaling up and growing. So the impediments are security, regulation, and then go back to security because you can't export the things. But I'm not kidding. Like shop, made in Ukraine, made in Ukraine, made in Ukraine. Great bag. This obviously, Gunya. It seems small, but it is incredibly powerful. Not only are you getting amazing high quality stuff, but it gets shipped to you. So so now the post, now either Ukrpochta or Nova Pochta, people have jobs and stuff. So there's, demand is an impediment too, sort of global demand, as well as all the sort of manufacturing constraints and stuff.
So thank you again. Also, I have also got the last 2 years a crash course on NGOs and humanitarian help in Polish. I've been in Boston. I came to Brown, but then been in Boston 27 years. But as the escalation happened, I decided to be in Poland for 5 months. And my question will be, you do work in Ukraine. I already met your strong people from the Ocalenie, from that group. I am currently, after being 5 months, 2022 and 2023, very concerned about young Ukrainians aged 14 to 17 in my country. There is about 350, 400,000 that need to be schooled, and more than 40% is not. And I'm the leading power actually in Warsaw to try to figure out systems how to find them, because they already had COVID and it's their 4th or 5th year. So I wonder, because you speak about Ukraine, could we somehow join forces? We in Poland have not been used to Polish being so, like we have now the 350,000 kids that need to speak Polish, right? So we had to build a robust group of, and it happened to me that I'm a glottolinguist, so I couldn't do it with a few people, and now we even have a UNICEF. So that's one thing. So my question would be, is there a way we could, as you spoke about the app, we could join forces? And I have realized there's lots of things on internet, but they're scattered and there's nothing is centered.
But it doesn't need to be centered. I would challenge you to find an organization in Ukraine who works with you and do one thing together.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing can be a panel discussion. One thing can be something that we did yesterday, which was just announce that we were, the Razum community was going to gather at a certain hour for an after dinner drink. And we had like a dozen people who didn't know each other meet. And I know perhaps a Harvard Business School case is going to come out of it, right? So my point is, you don't have to boil the ocean, but if you've got something to offer and you see a need, find someone just to do one thing with, and then let that grow into something else.
Okay.
Thank you.
In the middle. In the middle.
Thank you. So you're discussing how kind of Western Europe has been rather passive and reactive and tends to fall asleep. So what's Razum's long-term strategy to keep Western Europe awake in terms of support, especially in a social media that's a very day-to-day, almost very low attention sort of environment?
Yeah, so Western Europe, good question. We like to collaborate with other organizations that are kind of like-minded. And so there is a need to keep Western Europe engaged, and not just for Western Europe to be engaged, but I think for Western Europe to push the United States to stay engaged. Like, we're sort of redefining how we work. So our focus so far has been on being responsible with the immensely generous donations that people have given us in cash and in kind, and setting up systems to deliver those as quickly as possible into the right hands. We do receive donations from Western Europe, but we haven't done any programs per se in Western Europe. We're now getting to know now that we can sort of things are not, calls every 2 hours kind of. We're looking a bit in the long haul. And I'd love to see some more collaborations with organizations in Western Europe. And I'm thinking specifically about the next wave of the Ukraine reconstruction conference. The first one was in Lugano. The second one was in London. This one's going to be in Berlin. So I'd love to see the NGOs of Ukraine and global NGOs around the world that are focused on Ukraine to have some place to be able to meet and compare notes. And in that way, we can help each other out, mangrove forest style, to work in various countries, because each country has its own specificities and stuff. But if we can kind of lift each other up, knowing what we know, I think we could have a bigger impact.
And will that Berlin conference be live streamed?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not organizing it. It's like the government's organizing.
You'd have to, I think if you look, I can look it up, but Reconstruction Conference, Ukraine, Berlin, you'll probably find it. Yeah, in the back in the blue. In the back in the blue suit. Thanks. And Christina, can you take the hand in the back?
First of all, thank you so much for this inspiring speech and all of the things that Razom does. My name is Seraphim. I'm freshman at Brown University. I'm also a finalist of UGS, Ukraine Global Scholars, program that helps Ukrainians to get on campuses.
Started and run by Ukrainians. Ukraine Global Scholars started and run by Ukrainians.
And come back and use this knowledge in Ukraine to rebuild it and lead. I'm also part of SUSTA, which is a union of student organizations in the United States. And what is going on right now is this crucial moment where student organizations are in its rise, like where all of the peak and interest passed after the full-scale invasion started, and there is this fatigue that everyone is talking about. What you mentioned in your speech is this conception of Razom working together. And I got a sense that's a vision, that's a question that you ask yourself when you make decisions. So my question is, for you, like, what is your opinion? What is this vision for every particular student on campus, Ukrainian student on campus, that one can ask themselves every day, and particularly in their just life decisions, but also primarily in decisions in their student organizations, in engagement with American students, international students, and what is, to an extent, like the key to the hearts of Americans and international students? Thank you.
Wow. To answer that question, I would go to thinking that particularly the undergraduate experience in a liberal arts institution is amazing. Like in terms of what it is different from so much of the world. The Ivory Tower is a lovely place that has a role to play. So if you have a chance to be in the Ivory Tower, milk it for all you can. And by that, I mean, learn as many things as you can and have conversations with people you wouldn't meet otherwise. Take classes you would never think of taking. 35-ish, whatever many years it's been since I graduated from Princeton. Some of the courses that stay with me is contemporary art history. And I got a politics degree. So take the class that you don't think you should take and talk with the people you don't think have anything of interest to you, because you have this gift, you have this opportunity right now. And in terms of Ukraine, you have an opportunity to share your perspective of Ukraine and make a connection point that you never know what's going to happen 30 years later. I mean, we could talk about Chernobyl HBO as a weird story, but you never know. So use the time to take a class or to join a club that you wouldn't necessarily think of. And that in that way, you'll be able to you'll have a lot more options to do a lot more good for Ukraine later and now. I hope that helps. Also, I wish I could just go back and take a bunch more courses.
In the back?
You made a very compelling comment in encouraging us to create a venue, get an audience together, and then step aside and hand the mic over to a native Ukrainian. That really resonated with me because a lot of times I've seen in the years people who are not Ukrainian, native Ukrainians, just kind of bulldoze over and try to do their best, but forget what the actual meaning and message is. So I wanted to know, how can we do more of this kind of work, stepping aside, letting the native Ukrainians take over, but quietly work in the background? Are there other ways that you could suggest to us, to this audience, of how to do that and work forward?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I bet you have an address book and you know a lot of people and people trust you. So if you can convene those people to watch a film, go to a literature reading, go to a discussion, go to an art exhibit, that way you're bringing you're bringing an audience that wouldn't necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of countries in the world. And there's a lot of great cultures in the world. How do you introduce what Ukraine has to offer? And that's where really it's not more complicated than thinking about a few people that you know that would be interested in topic X, and then bringing someone who has topic X, and then finding a place to meet. Maybe it's a tour of a museum together, or an art gallery, or a poetry reading, or hey, there's this film, let's screen it together. And that really makes a big impact.
And if I might add, for our local audience, Harvard Kennedy School is doing a screening of 20 Days in Mariupol. I believe it's February 12th. So if you're local, this would be a great chance to
Definitely
activate some of these things.
Do you know if Mstislav will be there? Either of the filmmakers?
No.
Okay, they're amazing. The film itself stands on its own.
Please, the information is going to be on the website. I'm not 100% sure, but it's at it'll be in the Kennedy School. The film screening, I believe, is February 12th. Sarah.
Hey.
Hi, Sarah Chazinski here. Dora, thank you for all your hard work over the years, and it was wonderful to hear your personal stories. Can you share a little bit about when we collectively are doing this work, my backpack of privilege and how I'm using that to make change and bolster voices that need to be heard? Can you share a little bit about how Razum was an incredible incubator for the American Coalition for Ukraine, and share a little bit about how we can all get involved more in that?
Sure. I mean, American Coalition for Ukraine, I think, is classic. If you really want to understand the guts of how Razum has worked iteratively over the past 10 years, one way to tell this story of an organization that's now 100, or like a platform for 100 organizations in all these states. It was a press conference in front of the White House with 2 members of the press. But there was a logo, right? Logo maker, logo. There was drive, there was professionalism, there was spirit, and the guts to get 6, 7, 10 people together. I have to go back and look at the pictures. It was freakishly cold. It was April. And it was a weirdly cold day. And a group of people wrote a statement, simple, 5 paragraphs maybe. And people got up and spoke and said, hey, we're doing this thing. And so it can be like, coming to a film screening, it matters. It goes because it's a thing. Talking about coming to a film screening matters only if you do the film screening. Talking about the coalition is important, is matters only if you actually then go and do it. And it doesn't have to be a fully baked thing. So there's been a ton of things that Razum volunteers have done through the years that has not taken root. But everywhere we just keep going and try the next thing and be as professional and as fair and as honest and as transparent as we can. And then so from that first press conference, some phone calls, and then the summit. What is a summit? I don't know. Let's make an agenda. It's a conference. Do this. And okay, we'll try this. Oh, fun fact, when we were creating the advocacy team. So should we rent office space? I don't know. That's kind of a lot. We don't really got our accounting system set up. Well, let's get an Airbnb that can be an office and a place where people can have meetings and a place where, so start off with an Airbnb and then you move on. And now we're in a real co-working space. And so I guess with the American Coalition for Ukraine, it started with the need, from the Syrian activists saying there's going to be a lot of organizations popping up and they're not going to know what to do. And some of them are going to do some good stuff and some of them are going to do some not so good stuff. And then they're going to trip and fall over each other. And then the people who really need to know won't get the information, like the legislators won't really know what to know. So get yourselves organized, create some place where people can talk amongst themselves and figure it out. And I think that's the real power of the American Coalition for Ukraine. And now it's with your leadership and others going further. And that's the idea. The idea is you don't have to have it all fully baked, but do one thing and then keep going.
And I think this is really helpful to think about. One of the things that came up in the first panel, at least, is about how challenging and somewhat uncomfortable it's been for those of us who have had a certain political position for many years to all of a sudden be going to Capitol Hill and saying, actually, Ukraine needs some more weapons. Thank you very much. And so just thinking about taking maybe little baby steps toward there gets you to the point where you really feel like you can see how advocacy is making a difference.
Free phone numbers.
So I mean,
phone numbers.
it doesn't really take much. As someone who's participated in 2 of these summits, I can say, it really is a shift for your perspective in a positive way. I want to we have a couple of questions on Zoom that are related to the future and specifically to reconstruction. And so last year's conference, I know many of you attended, was about reconstructing, rebuilding Ukraine. And it's very interesting, this conference theme last year, that's what all the conferences were about in 2023. And
because the counteroffensive was over already, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the timing kind of changed. And now we're approaching this much more, big picture question of decolonizing. So I'm going to ask you to think a little bit or tell us a little bit about what you have in mind for Razum's role in Ukraine in terms of reconstruction in the future, but also how you see how we think about reconstruction as something that is part of decolonizing.
So the first part, I'm going to give kind of a wonky MBA answer. It's about structures and governance and KPI, key performance indicators, and talent management and talent management and talent management. And it's about sort of how do we responsibly engage people to support the programs of Razum without, because, from $200,000 and a few thousand donors to, people in this room, our average donation size is a couple $100. But that's tens of thousands of individuals, all of whom got a tax receipt. Okay. Like super sexy. Audited financial statements by an outside firm. Passed our first audit with flying colors. Long form 990. Doing the next one. So that kind of infrastructure building, being flexible enough to understand that we don't know what the future holds, but we need to keep our promises to the end users that are counting on us. We need to keep our promises to the people who have entrusted their money with us. And so what do we do to make sure that we do that, build that structure, and keep the spirit that has gotten us this far imbued in that structure? So that's very much where we are right now as an organization, where 2022 was like, move fast, figure things out, do things. 2023 was, okay, let's get organized, let's get structured, let's do this. And now we're looking at, okay, how do we optimize? How do we prioritize? What do we do really well? We're in it for the long haul. We're in it, we're focused on Ukraine. We have a way of doing things. How do we keep that going? And the second part of your question about how to decolonize?
How does that serve the bigger project of decolonizing? Or does it? Maybe?
Because it does. Because it's driven by Ukrainians around the world, because together we are Ukraine. But that doesn't mean one way, and I'm just going to keep quoting Vale here. If you're in the United States, you can help Ukraine by learning about Ukraine. You can help Ukraine by cracking open that Lesa Ukrainka, or bust out, Vika's writings. Look at those differently. Be curious about the incredibly rich and multi-textured everything that is Ukraine. So be curious. And I think because you don't want to just create another colony. Or as my late father used to say, I don't know if anyone was going to get this, choose your colonizers wisely. If any of you knew my dad, anyway. But you don't want to be colonized. You want sovereignty. You want free will. You want to exercise your free will. You want to be part of a community. You want to help that community. It's just sort of basic human needs and humanity and dignity. I think, dignity, that's what it's got to keep coming down to. And when you're getting bombed at, when my colleague's 5-year-old kid they were moving back when they moved back to Kiev, they had to like pick a school based on the bomb shelter. And I talked with her or anyone that age, like language, the saltiness of the language is, and not for nothing, but but there is this hardening and there is this destruction. And, all of us living with World War II at the dinner table every day, explicitly or implicitly, like war sucks. And it keeps on being awful. And so the reconstruction is a physical reconstruction, but it's a societal reconstruction. And so that's why I think of it in terms of like, we're not waiting for the missiles to stop. We're we're buying Ukrainian made stuff now. We're trying to change the schools, trying to create more content, now, because you can't wait.
So we are at 6 p.m. It has been a long day. That was a lot of questions. Please join me in thanking.
Thank you very much.
For those of you who have not yet seen it, we actually do have some of this wonderful Ukrainian literature in English translation available just outside. If the tables are closed, they will be open again tomorrow for you to peruse. Please join us at 10 a.m. sharp tomorrow. We have 2 more panels, which will be followed by a reception for even more conversation about decolonizing. So thanks everyone again, and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.